Welcome to episode 7 of Gringo Gone Wild. I'm Rusty Johnson. When I first decided to go to Africa, it was really to study the wildlife, the ecosystems. But then to my big surprise, I ended up getting really into the cultural and social systems of Africa, how they work, how they don't work. And one of the most amazing experiences I had with that when I was just first leaving South Africa to head to Hwange National Park. I was driving along and I'd see these different shanty villages on the sides of the road. So what happened, I decided, let's see if I can stop and see if somebody along the side of the road would invite me into their village and I can get a first-hand look of how the, quote, other people live that are outside of the city. So my plan was, while I was driving, I'd always see people on the side of the road that were selling these beautiful wood carvings. Every 10 miles or so, they had these huge carvings of wooden giraffes. Some are over 5 foot tall. And there's also like abstract artists that would sculpt crane-like birds out of carved mufflers that they found that dropped off a car in the middle of the road. And set behind these salesmen were small villages, and mostly made out of metal sheets, cardboard, and paper bags. I wanted to get into one of those to see what it was really like. Many of these residents leave their native villages to migrate to the city for a better life. But unfortunately, in the city, there's not enough jobs to accommodate everybody. So penniless and hungry, they build these villages and wait for something better to come along, and it seldom arrives. The villages are really considered graveyards of hope. Most of these slums are illegal, and the police equipped with bulldrozers will occasionally doze the village over. The very clever squatters will make their homes from folded cardboard and sticks and disassemble them every morning. And at the first rumble of a bulldozer, they can grab their homes, fold them up, and run. Yet it never disrupts the Africans' will to survive, because days later, the sun will rise over a newly constructed village built in its place. So when I came across some salesmen selling carvings on the side of the road, I slowed down my car, pulled over, and tried to make friends with them. And talking to them may give me the opportunity to enter their village more as a new friend and not as a strange intruder. Throughout history, the white man has brought many Africans turmoil and death. So I was extremely careful to respect their space and gain their trust before I imposed on their territory. While I was pulling off on the side of the road, I gazed into a small grassy valley sloping off to my right. And at the bottom, about 20 feet below the road, was a small village, really no bigger than a football field, maybe. So I parked next to these three men and stepped out the truck to greet them. Two of them smiled and looked toward the third man, expecting him to be the spokesperson. Many of these villagers do speak English, but not to any really great degree. The tall man replied, "We fine, boss, and you?" After years of rule of the white minority, many South African blacks are still programmed to believe they're less than whites, or at least they fake it in the presence of a white man. I responded, "No need to call me boss, we are equal." We firmly shook hands and he told me their names. I could not understand what they said, but I got the impression that they were all brothers. Immediately after introductions, they proceeded to try and sell me anything they could that wasn't rooted down to the earth or had the ability to run. I would have loved to buy many of their creations, but I had over 10,000 more miles to travel, and I did not want to carry anything that was not necessary. Then I realized that if I purchased the carving, it might benefit me in two ways. One, it would help put food on their table, and two, they may be more inclined to allow me into their village. There were so many pieces to choose from: carved elephants, giraffes, baboons, and rhinos. Some are made from a dark, glossy black wood. Several were light tan with a wandering grain through them. So I purchased a 2-foot-tall carved elephant for about 60 rand, which was at the time about $20. It was museum quality from a light-toned wood, showing grain pattern that was a masterpiece in itself. And they had like 5-inch long tusks carved from cowbone that protruded below his trunk. I paid for the carving, and then I heard rumbling sounds, and then saw this beast of a truck just abruptly pulling up next to us, skidding to a stop. It was a brand new Land Rover. The man driving it shut the engine off and clumsily climbed out of the rig. A woman stepped out of the passenger door, and the three brothers swarmed over to them to try to get another sale. As I browsed through the rest of their inventory, I noticed the man and the woman seemed very arrogant and talked down to the natives. The man was short-billed, pale, significantly overweight, having only a small handful of hair matted to the back of his head. I would say that he was legally bald. He was sweating profusely, and his clothes seemed uncomfortably tight. And even his, and what it just sticks in my mind is his pants would make this annoying wisping sound as he walked. And when he laughed at his own crude remarks, his body gave this like constricted jiggle, while his straining over tight belt looked like a python trying to make a kill. In addition, the belt gave his body the illusion that he was smuggling a motorcycle tire around his waist. His lady friend was tall, stunningly beautiful, light-skinned black woman with long braided hair and dramatically defined cheekbones. I've seen many unmatched pairs like this all through Africa. Many of these beautiful women grow up penniless, and they'll seek a wealthy man regardless of his looks or how he treats her. Beauty is skin deep, but starvation is to the bone. With a thick Dutch accent, the man began to bargain with the three brothers. He just drove up in a $60,000 vehicle, yet he was trying to haggle for the equivalent of $2 or $3. Unfortunately, this is a typical scenario in these parts. Knowing well these natives only make a few dollars a month, the Dutchman still convinced them to sell the carvings at half its price. The brothers' body language told me that they did not want to settle for such an unreasonable low price, but they needed to feed their families. Then the Dutchman really pushed his luck. He tempted the brothers with food. He showed them a can of chicken soup, and he tried to barter for more carvings. The man chose a baboon carving, which would normally sell for about 30 rand. Even though the can of soup never satisfied the hunger they feel every day, they still considered the trade. It was almost a done deal until one of the brothers noticed the supermarket price on the can, and it read 5 rand. Suddenly, one of the brothers became outraged upon discovering he almost been had. He began throwing his arms out and screaming in a mysterious language unknown to any of us. The couple became so terrified at this dramatic display of rage the Dutchman quickly leaned over and dropped the carving in the dirt, and he and his woman scampered back into the rig and sped off. As the Land Rover faded into the distance, the three brothers burst out laughing, folding over and holding their stomachs as they fell to the ground. With no care of getting dirty, they rolled on the earth laughing as the dust collected and their tears streaming down their face. I suddenly became infected with the hilarity of the situation, and the ground too drew me like a magnet. Before I knew it, I became part of this comical scene as if I was one of their long-lost albino brothers. A few moments passed and we gained our composure and wiped the tears from our eyes. After I caught my breath, I decided to ask if I could visit their village. But as if they knew what I was going to ask, they invited me themselves. I helped carry their carvings in old canvas bags and followed them towards the village. In broken English, the tall brother says, "The secret to a happy life is to get at least one good laugh in a day." He could not be more true. Little would I guess that I would find one of the secrets to a happy life while rolling and laughing in a ditch along an African roadside. I followed the brothers down a goat trail leading to the village. As they walked ahead of me, they continued to speak to me in an incomprehensible form of English. I had a terrible time understanding them, but could make out a few words and understood questions and statements by the pitch of their voices. Half listening, I began to absorb the dry desert-like environment. It was about 12:30 in the afternoon, and the day was hot. At first, the village seemed to be abandoned. There was no sounds, no movements could be detected. I saw that the shelters were typical of most squatter villages I've seen from a distance. Scrap wood, sheet metal, and plastic molded the architecture. We walked into the village by squeezing between two metal shacks. I became slightly startled when I noticed that every home contained people, sitting in the dark shadows to keep cool from the hot sun. They began to emerge from their boxes. As many as 10 people crawled out of each shelter of at least 15 feet by 15 feet. People appeared endlessly from everywhere and slowly walking towards us. As if I were an alien, the entire village gathered around me and stared. Many of the other children have never seen a white man before and approached me with caution and curiosity. An older man with a baritone voice said, "Good afternoon." Before I could respond, one of the brothers told everyone what he did to the fat Dutchman, and the group roared with laughter. Not really knowing what to say, I smiled nervously and said hello. until the man with the baritone voice struck up a conversation with me. "My name is Bakari. Please relax and feel at home. We don't have much, but you're welcome to all of it." Thanking him for his hospitality, I mentioned that I just stopped to take a rest from driving, and I would be very grateful if he would show me around the village. He was delighted to do so. I noticed during our conversation that most of the villagers followed me around and stared, many with big smiles, some with unsure expressions, and the children were just simply puzzled. Bakari began the tour with his home. It was made of 3 sheets of rusted metal with jagged, sharp edges. I could see several white scars on his right shoulder that matched the burred metal edge of one of his walls. He must occasionally cut himself when he exited the home. His floor was nothing more than packed dirt with a mixture of canvas and plastic bags sewn into a bed mat and blanket. Next to the mat was a small jury-rigged cooking stove made out of a rusted old bucket and a piece of 6x6 metal fencing. In the corner opposite the bed was a bag that looked like it previously held grain or animal feed. It was modified with a drawstring cord and laid open, exposing some of his personal belongings, old faded pictures of his many wives and children, and various identification and tribal papers. He then took me down a rough, muddy path scarred with hundreds of bare, dry footprints. A thunderstorm the night before had flooded most of the low-lying areas. Hacked up slabs of wood bridged to deep puddles of stagnant, bacteria-ridden water where babies played together naked. There's no electricity, running water, or bathrooms. Towards the end of the village, a small ditch was considered the bathroom of the whole community. I did my best to stay away from that area, and it was rather easy because even though one could not see it, one knew it was there. The older children ran through the paths kicking a homemade soccer ball constructed from plastic bags and string, while wearing outdated American clothes most likely donated by a foreign church group. Bakari continued the tour while 6 or 7 villagers followed us like a celebrity entourage. Several children became rather comfortable with my presence and began to grab at my pant leg and hold my hands. Within one shelter, a group of elderly natives sat perfectly still, ignoring my presence. They only expended enough energy to occasionally swat flies away from their faces, until one elderly man turned his head and stared at me with his piercing cataract-clouded eyes. His dark, wrinkled face showed years of bitter anger, while his eyes expressed a distrust that I've never seen before in a human. He bitterly snapped a comment at me in his native tongue. Bakari returned a scolding comment in my defense. I smiled the comment off and respectfully continued on. "Bitterness and despair runs deep in these slums," Bakari said. "Many minds are wasted here. Every soul in this walking cemetery could succeed in the modern world if given the respect, education, and opportunity." He pointed to a young girl several yards away. She's a cute girl about 12 years old playing tag with her sister using an old goat as a shield. She circled around the animal, keeping just out of reach. "Her name is Shakir," Bakari said, "which means child born in the grace of God. Her family migrated from Nigeria and hoped for work. Her mother brags all day how smart she is. She says Shakir is always the smartest in the class. Someday she'll be a rich doctor, and the whole family will live in a beautiful home in the city and have a big pool." Well, for 2 years now, Shakari has not attended school because the family cannot afford the annual tuition, the equivalent of $20 American. Unfortunately, just like her 9 older sisters, she will most likely never go back to school, become one of a man's many wives, and bear as many as 5 children before the age of 20. As we continued on, I got the impression that if this village was a single tribe, Bakari would be the chief. He was clearly well respected and revered. Even the children were fond of him. He knew each one by name, and it was obviously that he deeply cared about every one of them. One child yelled, "Hey, boss!" and kicked me the soccer ball. Not realizing how much bounce a ball of plastic bag and string has, I booted the ball back at him, but it streaked over his head directly into a hedge of thorn bushes. The children yelped and chased after the ball. 2 of the children had sticks and tried to beat the ball out of the bushes, only to knock it in further. With their efforts going nowhere, I walked over and carefully weaved my body between the thorny branches to receive their ball. The children yelled, "No, no, no! Use the stick, use the stick! The snakes, the snakes!" Well, snakes are a huge problem in these villages. When the village's garbage begins to pile up, it attracts armies of rodents. And the rodents attract snakes, most of them poisonous. The black mamba, for example, can inject enough venom with a single bite to kill 10 grown men. Ever since I was 6 years old, I've loved and handled snakes, so I was not concerned with the threat, but still remained cautious. While I attempted pulling the ball out of the brush, the thin shreds of plastic bag snagged and hung on the needle-like thorns. I freed the ball after a couple firm tugs and then passed it on to the child, who began juggling it in his feet as if he was a soccer pro. These tin shacks trap many talents and dreams, Bakari lamented. Like caged lions, they wander in circles, wearing down an endless path to nowhere. The height of the sun off the horizon reminded me that precious travel time was being lost. I said this to Bakari, and he offered to walk me back to my truck. We backtracked through the village, and I said my goodbyes to the brothers. On my way, a young boy who had silently hung on to the back of my shirt since I've arrived began to tug harder, almost until I had to drag him. I turned and smiled. "I have to go now," I said. As he shook his head no, his eyes began to well with tears. "You come back?" he said in a squeaky voice. I said, "No, I'm sorry, I can't." "Why?" "Because this is not my home," I said. "Can I come home with you?" I said, "Sorry, buddy, you have to stay here and help with the village." Without a response, he just stared at me and began to cry. Each time a tear ran off his face, my heart sank lower. When we met, I was his only connection to the modern world, and he felt closer to that world when I was near. I knelt down next to him, and he hugged my neck. His bony little elbows dug into my shoulders, and I asked him, "What is your name?" "Atu," he said. "Well, Atu, it's nice to meet you. My name is Rusty. But I really must go now. I promise that when I return home, I will send you a letter. I have many friends in the city, and they will come out and give it to you. You have my word." I then gave him the carved elephant I purchased from the brothers, and told him to sell it and buy some food. Bakari said that he would see to it, and then he walked me back to the truck. "What does the future hold for you?" I asked Bakari. "A road far too dusty to see where it leads, my friend. My name means one who will succeed, so my day shall come if the gods wish it to be. Until then, I will help my people and pray." As I started up the truck, Bakari handed me a black carved rhino and said, "This is for you. I just finished it today, and I hope it brings you luck." I thanked him very much for everything, and I promised I would keep in touch. When I returned to New York, I immediately wrote a letter to Atu and Bakari, offering to pay for the children's school tuition. But unfortunately, my friend attempted to deliver the letter, and he learned that their village was bulldozed, and they were forced to relocate into an unknown area. Thank you for listening to episode 7 of Gringo Gone Wild. I hope you enjoyed it. Please visit gringogonewild.com for more information, and please subscribe, and please stay tuned. And remember, in the end, all we have is our stories.